members of the Metropolitan Planning Organization and any of those who, from the public or other interested parties who are joined us today, welcome aboard, and we're glad to have you. We have a few folks who have gone live and are here in the County Council chambers, and the rest of our body is spread hither and yon, depending upon their natural locations. My name's Matt Creamer. I'm the chairman of the Metropolitan Planning Organization, and I want to thank you all for coming today and being involved in this potentially one of the most exciting and perhaps important areas of study that we've done in quite some time. Well, I don't know what that was, but maybe it only came here. I hope no one's ears were hurt. To begin our meeting today, I think the first item of the agenda is approval of the August 2nd, 2001 meeting minutes. But before we do that, Keith has a sad commentary and message for all of us, and I would ask him if you would ask for a moment of silence and for the purpose thereof.
Thank you, Chairman Kramer. Yes, it's with a heavy heart that I share with you that one of our dear colleagues through the Maryland Department of Transportation, Mr. Ian Beam, passed away from medical complications over this past weekend. Tyson might chime in at any time as well. Ian had been a part of the Metropolitan Planning Organization's Technical Advisory Committee for the past 15 years at least, ever since I've been part of the MPO, and probably predates me as well. It was sudden. His family's in our thoughts and prayers. At this point, there's not many details to share. However, as more details become available, we will pass that along to the MPO community. We do plan on doing something for Ian's family. However, again, that's not been determined at this time. If we could take a moment of silence and reflect on Ian, what he meant to us, both personally and professionally, that would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Keith. Ian is going to be sorely missed. He and I used to enjoy swapping hunting stories whenever he was down here, but he always had one that would top mine.
I don't have the exact details, but at this point in time, I do know that the plan is to have a service for him at the Uniontown Bible Church in Union Bridge, Maryland, on Sunday. It's either like 1:30 or 2:30, somewhere in the afternoon, is what we are hearing, but we haven't heard the definite plans yet. I will forward them to the MP to Keith when I do get the details for any of those that are interested.
Thank you very much. Who was that speaking?
That was Tyson Byrne with the Maryland Department of Transportation as well.
Thank you, Mr. Byrne. All right, has everyone had an opportunity to read the minutes of our August 2nd, 2021 meeting?
Yes.
If there are any additions or corrections that someone wants to address, the time to do so is now. Hearing none, the chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of August 2nd, 2021. Is there a motion?
Tyson Byrne from the Maryland Department of Transportation motions to approve the minutes.
A motion has been entered. Is there a second to the motion, please?
Second, Andy Kitzrow.
All right, the motion has been made and seconded. All in favor of the approval of the minutes of August 2, 2021, please say aye.
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 Is there any opposition? Hearing none, the meeting minutes of August 2nd, 2021 are approved. The next item of business is the Port of Salisbury study presentation. Is Mr. Oberhart present, or is he
Yes.
en route?
Good afternoon.
Oh, okay. I was looking around. I didn't realize you were going to be in absentia. Please go ahead, Mr. Oberhart. Your study is of great interest to us.
Great. Yes. Thank you very much. I'm going to take a moment to set up my slide deck here and share the screen with that. So Keith, I believe you'll need to enable screen sharing for participants.
Okay, I'm going to throw you a little bit of a curveball. I made you the host, so
Okay.
hopefully we're going to be seeing your screen. If not, we'll figure this out. There you go. I can see it.
Okay. So you should be able to see the slide deck up there. Before I begin, is Laura Stoker from the city of Salisbury in attendance too? I think I saw her.
I'm here.
On the well, Laura, was there anything that you wanted to say as an introduction before I begin with this?
Nothing to add. I think we can just dive right into it. So.
Laura, if you'd like,
Okay.
if you'd like to come up so we can get you on camera, you'd be welcome.
I think we're because
All right.
we need potatoes.
Maybe at the end we can talk about the joint partnership and the funding relationship.
Yep.
Terrific. Thank you.
Sounds good. All right. Well, thank you very much to everyone for the opportunity to present and share some of the findings from this study today. I understand that the draft report document has been shared and everyone has also received a copy of these slides in the meeting materials. So what I'll be doing is briefly going through these slides to provide some background information and high-level findings about the project as a refresher for everyone. And then we can open it up for questions and comments following that. So a little bit of background about the project. Project objective here was to help the city of Salisbury and the greater Salisbury community understand whether or not a multi-user port facility is economically or physically feasible. And when we say multi-user port facility, we're referring to a port that can support multiple tenants and or multiple types of cargo handling at one site. And so if a port facility like this was feasible, what would the potential benefits be for Salisbury and Delmarva area businesses as well? For reference, when we talk about port facilities, we're talking about the facilities you see here on this map. This includes the North Prong with Mertech Marine, marine construction and consulting firm, Purdue Agribusiness, and as well as marine terminals on the main branch of the Wicomico River. So Chesapeake Shipbuilding, Cato Oil, Vulcan Materials, and Center Point Terminal, which also handles oil and other liquid bulk goods. For background on port operations, the port has historically been a significant receiver of liquid fuel, aggregates such as stone, and agricultural products for communities across the region. This reflects the fact that water transportation and barge transportation in particular are best suited for high volume and lower value per ton commodities. In 2019, the port handled about 1 million tons worth of cargo, a slight increase over the historic lows that were seen during the Great Recession. And almost all of this tonnage handled at the port was inbound from other communities throughout the Chesapeake area. It's important to note on this graph here with the dotted line, 1 million tons is an important threshold because it is the threshold that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers uses to determine if a navigation project is economically significant. And that economically significant designation is important because it makes it easier for navigational projects to be allotted funding for things like dredging and other improvements. Looking at opportunities for port development, in doing many of the consultations for this project, as well as the substantial data and commodity flow analysis that you'll find in the appendices of the report, we ended up doing a synthesis of strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities. And it's important to point out that for the port facilities in Salisbury, a key opportunity is growth in existing cargoes among existing port users. There is demonstrated an existing demand for maritime services in the city. But a key weakness and threat for the city's port facilities is the fact that there is this continued need for ongoing dredging support. And therefore, it's important to consider the fact that maintaining tonnage above that 1 million ton threshold is an important way to help ensure that that dredging support continues in the future. One of the things that we did after looking at some of the major strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats for the port was think through, why the city and why the broader Salisbury community might want to engage in port development. Basically, what can this do? What can't it do? Why would this be a topic that a public agency or a public community might want to engage in? And through this work, we've determined that port development can provide some public benefits. It can enable growth at existing businesses in the region. It can preserve cost-effective and energy-efficient supply chains for local businesses and residents. In particular, the fact that maritime transportation is more energy efficient and cost-effective for hauling kind of lower value materials over long distances relative to trucking or railroad shipping means that it's an important transportation asset for the region. Also, investment in the port could preserve activity and employment in other water-related businesses, in particular by keeping tonnage high enough to secure regular Army Corps of Engineers support for dredging, and then support those existing businesses that rely on the navigational channel for their operations. And finally, public engagement in port development could also possibly support some local community goals, such as redevelopment of parts of the North Prong. For example, there's a downtown master plan example of redevelopment ideas there at the right. It is also really important to note, though, that based on the commodity flow analysis that we did, the consultations with industry stakeholders and economic development stakeholders throughout the region, and our own experience in port development. In the case of Salisbury, we don't think that port development should be expected to increase the diversity of businesses in Salisbury, at least in the near term. That is to say, there wasn't much demonstrated demand for port services outside of existing users. So some of the barriers to port development, and especially during many of the consultations, this topic of information and coordination came up. In particular, for many of the private stakeholders who either used the port or had some interest in the port, there was a strong desire for additional information and kind of cooperation amongst community stakeholders. And in particular, when talking to the private sector, we found that people were not as interested in engaging in port development yet because they were uncertain. They were uncertain on the potential return on their own investment if they were going to engage in their own port development activities. They were kind of unsure of the intentions of other port users or their development plans in the future. And they're also uncertain about the city or the broader community's plans for port development or the reuse or redevelopment of port areas. And so a really important role for the city and other public agencies that comes out of this is a role as an information broker, supporting information sharing and coordination among other public agencies and other private port stakeholders to help everyone understand what the vision will be for the port in the future and how the city will support achieving that vision. So how can Salisbury support port development? We've identified a couple of ways that the city and the broader community may wish to engage in port development. I think one of the big first things here is policies. The idea that Salisbury should adopt some sort of formal maritime policy that defines the city's goal in engaging in port development, the stakeholders and partners it's going to work with when it comes to port development, and ultimately the long-term goals that it's expected to achieve. For example, supporting redevelopment of the North Prong or supporting existing businesses in the community and things like that. Some other potential areas of engagement for the city could include partnerships, There's the topic of creating a port administration, which I'll talk about on the next slide. There's also the topic of providing sponsorship or partnership with private companies to apply for state or federal grants, sometimes freight transportation investment grants or transportation investment grants more broadly require a public partner for grants to be made for private infrastructure and things like that. Finally, also there's opportunities for projects, and we'll talk about those after we talk about the port administration. So there was this big topic of, if the city wants to engage in port development, how does it go about doing that? Given the fact that traditionally the city has really not kind of played in this space or kind of engaged deeply in port development in the way that many other maritime communities across the east and west coasts as well as the Great Lakes have. And so one of the concepts that we've introduced in the draft report is this idea of a port authority that can guide port development and operations and also diffuses potential concerns around conflicts of interest. Basically, the idea here is at the top of the organization, you have a port board that serves as a sort of kind of an expert brain trust for the port administration. And this would be a paid or volunteer advisory panel made up of subject matter experts in marine engineering, economic development, environmental policy, and things like that. Basically, people who could serve as informational resources for the 1 to 2 employees of the port administration and help guide first the port's development and then its operations later on. The port administration itself would also consist of 1 to 2 paid staff whose job it would be to manage port operations and conduct business development. Also in this graph, you'll see stevedoring firms. In larger ports or ports with more generalized cargo handling, these are often third-party private companies that handle cargo movement and storage. Given the potential interest in the Salisbury port, we wouldn't think that would necessarily be required in this situation, but did want to highlight that as an ingredient for some other port facilities elsewhere in the United States and Canada. And then finally, you have a firewall between the board and the users of the port or the shipping companies themselves. And the idea here is that since there would potentially be a limited number of users of the port, you don't necessarily want them to have a direct hand in approving things like cargo handling rates and things like that. You want them removed kind of one step from the decision-making process for the port. And the way that this port authority would capture money to pay for operations as well as capital investments could include long and short-term leases for portions of the property for individual companies who want to use the port, port dues and docking fees, basically fees that are paid once a time every vessel docks, as well as wharfage fees, which are charged per ton on cargo that moves across docks. So with our engineering partner, Century Engineering, we also did a couple of steps of pre-engineering study work. First thing we did was look at a couple of potential candidate sites on the Wicomico River. And eventually, based on feedback from the city, as well as the advisory steering group that was participating in this project, we selected the site that you see here at right on Marine Road. And so Century Engineering, you'll find in the report, has detailed information on the necessary site improvements for this area, the marine work, such as the construction of piers and mooring cells, and then also work for Marine Road in Salisbury to improve that for truck access, as well as improve the general quality of that road. So this is kind of a sample of what a potential facility could look like. And its purpose is primarily to handle aggregate material, so stone, sand, gravel, and things like that, as well as agricultural products. And these two commodities were identified through consultations with potential port users. So, if the city were to engage in setting up a port authority and ultimately supporting construction of some sort of multi-user port facility, there are certain impacts that could be expected and specific potential benefits that could be expected as well. At a high level, The estimate from Century is that it'd be about $22.8 million for infrastructure, and we estimate about $270,000 a year for the cost of the operating the port administration. The idea here being that these costs would be recouped from the terminal users, as well as potentially supported by grant support for some of those initial capital investments. Based on our consultations with potential users, we expect there could be an increase in tonnage between 50,000 and 125,000 tons per year, which translates to between 2,000 and 4,700 additional truck trips over the course of a year. So in exchange for that investment and those impacts, some of the benefits and opportunities the community could expect to see, a big one is sustained dredging support, increased tonnage, and increased support for dredging, basically avoiding the potential impacts of a shutdown of the port or a decline in service in the future. And so it's really important to note that barge service currently replaces an estimated 38,000 to 40,000 longer distance truck trips per year. And if the fuel and aggregate and agricultural products that are currently received by the port in Salisbury were traveling by truck or by rail, you'd expect to see higher air emissions, higher rates of spills and accidents, and a greater level of infrastructure damage or maintenance required, as well as additional shipping costs for the users of goods shipped by truck and rail. It's also important to note that the region currently is allotted about $4 million a year in dredging support from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So if dredging support was not regularly available or more inconsistent, that's a potential cost that would need to be incurred to maintain the navigational channel in the future. Some other benefits and opportunities, again, the ability to preserve employment at water-related firms by supporting continued navigation on the river, the opportunity to provide expansion room for existing businesses, including the Chesapeake Shipbuilding Facility, and the opportunity to engage in redevelopment of the North Prong, which could potentially increase property values and increase tax revenue for the city. So that's a very high-level summary of what's in the draft report. I'm free to answer questions, comments. I'm curious to hear what you think.
Are there any questions? I'll start. Looking at the last, your last slide, investment impacts and opportunities, you were referencing expected tonnage increases. So those numbers are over and above the existing amount of traffic on the river. Is that correct?
That's correct. That would be 50,000 to 125,000 tons more than the current 1.03 million that are handled as of 2019.
Well, we're very much aware of the threshold required for continued support by the Army Corps of Engineers to pay for the dredging study, dredging costs. And over the last almost 50 years that I've been involved with it in one level or the other in the county government, that has been a continuing effort to find and maintain and restore dredge sites so that they can be used for another round of spreading. And I would hope that as we move forward to flesh out some more of the needs, I believe you've done an excellent job with the study so far, and it gives us a lot of starting places to move from. And I'm glad to see that your numbers are new growth rather than that is on top of existing business and tonnage that comes out of the river. I wish we had more coming. Well, we have a lot of aggregate coming in. We have a lot of oil coming in, but we could surely use a whole lot more. Thank you. Anyone else?
Thank you.
Yes, and just looking at, slide on page 4 about port operations, and it's a good slide. It shows some drastic downturns in 2010, 2011. Is that downturn related to economic factors of the business cycle, or is that related to the need for dredging and the smaller vessels that are required to do that?
That downturn is primarily related to, well, the Great Recession, right? It bottoms out in the 2009 to 2010 period. And, in particular for things like sand and gravel, demand for those is really driven either by building construction or road construction or kind of just infrastructure projects more generally. So the decline that you see is primarily related to the decline, kind of the economic decline at that period. I don't know if it explains all of that, but from all the consultations we did, including Maryland Port Authority and Delmarva Water Transport Committee, there was no indication that commercial navigation has been kind of hindered or hampered in any way. So there hasn't been any kind of restriction on the channel that would have affected shipping during that time.
So if this downturn is predominantly related to the business cycle, it would appear to me, unless I'm interpreting it correctly, there is some excess capacity that the existing shipping lanes, the existing port could expand into, just shy of 2 million tons. And then if I read your analysis correctly, the addition of this port area would, I'm assuming in boom times, take this beyond the 2 million to something north of 2 million tons. Do you feel, should the port be constructed and that additional capacity be added to the system, the business cycle go well, do you feel there's adequate capacity to accommodate all of that increase in traffic?
I think an increase in traffic back to, almost 2 million, over 1.8 million. I don't know if that's going to happen in the near term. I don't know if it's appropriate to necessarily plan for that level of growth in the future. If you look at the commodities that underpin activity at the port, sand and gravel, that we are expecting that would increase in the future with continued population growth on the peninsula and things like that. But like this foundational tonnage of fuel, that one might grow in the future as population increases, but it also might remain flatter or ultimately decrease in the future as consumer personal vehicles become more efficient or more people transition to electric vehicles, things like that. So I don't have a crystal ball. I can't say what the tonnage will be for the port in the long-term future, but I would not expect it to return to that 1.8 million mark, even though it will potentially grow in the future. So that is to say then that the port facility should really be tailored to the needs of the firms that would be willing to sign up for long-term storage and use leases, and not necessarily constructed with a level of capacity that would correspond to activity 10, 15 years ago.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions, comments? No, hearing none. Again, thank you very much for the presentation, and I think you've done a first-rate job of pointing us in the right direction, and I think it's probably going to be, to some degree, or maybe a large degree, of the organization, the MPO, looking carefully at what needs to be, what in addition needs to be looked at beyond, well, especially with the 800-pound gorilla is the dredge sites, and virtually all the dredge sites are downriver anymore. The sites that are very close to Salisbury, or there were a few at one time that were in Salisbury, but that land's a whole lot more valuable now, and we need to continue efforts to make sure that we do not lose the opportunity for dredging. The Delmarva Water Transport Committee for many, many, many years. That was one of the reasons. That is for those of you who are not familiar with the Delmarva Water Transport Committee. It was a group of business owners and shippers who saw the tremendous need for continued dredge sites, and that organization and the county government worked together over the years, finding locations and finding property owners who are willing to participate, and that's going to continue. That's going to be the 800-pound gorilla forever, because these rivers tend to silt in and fill up in the dredging. They just have to be dredged. And the Army Corps of Engineers is only, if we were to try to figure out how to do that without the Army Corps of Engineers, it would be an almost impossible task.
Mm-hmm. And just to that point, I did send some materials to Keith after the previous technical advisory committee meeting, providing him with a little extra information on Maryland DNR, EPA, and NOAA's information on beneficial reuse of dredged materials, because the lack of storage space for dredged material is definitely not a problem unique to Salisbury nor even the East Coast, and it's a topic that a lot of people are kind of studying and working on. So I think there's going to be a lot of potentially very interesting developments in that area over the coming years.
Well, there are no other comments. Thank you very much.
Well,
Eric?
thank you very much for your time.
Eric, you might want to relinquish your role as host.
Yes, I just sent it back to the PAC 14 account there, the video screen, so you should be good. All right, well, thank you for your time, everyone.
Let me get back to the right page here. All right, we've trying to get to the right page.
That would be under tab 4. Tab number 4.
Oh, thank you,
For
Keith.
those here and
There we are,
those
yes.
participating remotely.
Shore Transit Choice Ridership Study conducted by Beacon. Dr. Memo Derricker, I know you are quote unquote retired in some respect, but I'm glad to see your fingers still in the pot.
Yeah, I call it rewirement. Yeah, we never retire. Anyway, I'm delighted to be here. I thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share this. And some of you know that shore transit is very, very near and dear to my heart, because the logo you see was designed on my conference room many years ago. And the name shore transit was actually coined by myself as I was buying the domain name for what today is shoretransit.org. The genesis of shore transit was actually a presentation made to a Rotary Club by Cynthia Jackson. Some of you will remember she was the director of social services for Wicomico County at the time. And this was the time of welfare to work incentives. And Ms. Jackson said she could solve half of our welfare to work issues if she could find reliable transportation for people receiving assistance. And from that conversation, a JARC application was put in, and Beacon at the time was a partner in that study, and we looked at the feasibility of creating what today is shore transit. And in fact, at the time, Ms. Ruth Baker was my associate director, and she eventually became the board chair of the original 501c3 that was shore transit before it got taken over or became part of the Tri-County Council. So this organization is very near and dear to my heart. It's also very important to me because as an engineering student in England, as I was studying over there, I rode the local transit system every day of my life, even though I had a car. And I'm going to come back to that issue of riding transit even when you have a car in Europe and explain why that is the case. And I was one of these choice riders. I didn't have to, but I was open to it and I benefited from it. So the study we undertook, let me do this quickly so that it's a little bit easier. There we go. The study we undertook was to understand who these choice riders could be and find out ways in which encouraging more of them to choose riding short transit by looking at what other similar transit systems are doing, as well as conducting some original research. So the challenges, as you can imagine, are known to most everybody here. The populations that are potentially receptive to this are visitors and tourists, K through 12 student population, and aging elderly population. These populations are, to some extent, in other parts of the country, using transit more than they are using here. There is a relationship between the two universities, UMES and Salisbury University, and short transit that makes it possible for our students to show their ID cards and ride the system, but it is not being used as much as we thought it would be used. There's also a slower adoption of technology to make it easier for these choice riders to access the service. And this is partly due to funding issues. And then there's the fee structure of the short transit routes that are seen as challenges. However, there are also some very significant successes, door-to-destination services for Americans with Disabilities Act paratransit riders, including transportation to docks and dialysis trips, affordable transportation for low-income riders, and a variety of transfer routes that are available. I know of a couple of our client companies at Beacon used to provide their employees subsidies for riding transit instead of driving their cars. So to do this study, we started, as we always do, looking at who else has done these things and what have they said. This is a review of the literature we conduct. The literature we reviewed was not just academic literature. We also conducted a review of quite a number of other studies done elsewhere, as well as publications in the practice of public transportation. We also looked at a number of similar transit systems that we had decided together with short transit as being peer or aspirational peer transit systems to see what they're doing. And then we did a survey of short transit's key stakeholders. Now, here I have to take a moment to say that we designed this entire project before COVID hit. So you can imagine that COVID created all kinds of challenges, not only to the people with whom we were working, but also to us in terms of being able to reach the right kinds of people and get the information we need. But together with the help of Brad Belachico at Short Transit and others, we were able to complete the research. And I'm going to share with you some of the findings from that research. Now, these are the questions interventions we suggested, excuse me, and we asked whether they would agree or disagree. A score of 1 is that they would strongly disagree. A score of 4, strongly agree. We chose not to provide a neutral. We forced them into agree or disagree, strongly disagree, strongly agree. This is a technique that is used so that you get a sense of the direction of the choices. One of the suggestions that other transit systems were using was mobile apps with mobile payments. This scored fairly highly, 3.3. Also, real-time bus location tracking. My in-laws live in Paris, France, and when we go there, we buy a week pass, and our week pass is actually on our app, on our phone. And we can see not only when the bus is coming to our stop, but where it is at this point and what the traffic is like on the way, so that we can plan for, maybe we have 5 minutes, we can pop in and buy something from the grocery store next door or whatever. It's a very helpful piece. We love using that. Also, trip planning. When we are using that app in France, we type in the destination to which we want to go, and the app tells us what combination of public transportation options we should use, and when we should be at what bus stop or metro stop to be able to do that. Obviously, we don't have metro stops here, but the point, you get the point. It enables us to decide when to be where to get to our destination at the desired time. Some of these recommendations are already in progress, and some of them have already been made, but this again was designed before COVID started. One of those was this mobile-friendly website with interactive user experience. This is a version of the app, but it's on a website. And then onboard reliable high-speed Wi-Fi was, as you can see, very, very highly seen. These days, that is seen almost as a must. Digital fare collection capacity and to redeem fares via mobile app. This kind of digital payment systems is becoming the norm, especially during COVID. A lot of people did not want to handle cash, and this was an easy way to do that. Of course, there is something called a digital gap, and certain parts of the population have access to these techniques and technologies more than others, so we need to keep that in mind. Bike racks were not a high choice, if you would. We thought this would score at least more than 3, but for some reason it didn't score as highly. I guess people are going to ride their bikes, they're going to ride their bikes, or they don't want to take the bikes to an area where they're not that familiar. I don't know what the answer is. We were disappointed to see this at 2.5. Additional comfortable bus shelters, we knew this was going to be scoring very highly. Nobody wants to be out in the cold, under the rain or snow or whatever, waiting for the bus to come. And for especially the elderly population users, benches, comfortable benches or molded seats are definitely an attraction. So we knew this would score high. Improved signage, another one where we thought it would be scoring a little bit higher, but did not. QR codes comes back to that issue of the digital gap. Not everybody likes using them. Not everybody knows how to use them, but it is being used successfully in other transit providers, especially the peers and aspirational peers we mentioned. Again, the bike racks were at the stops where they could lock it and leave it, did not score high, and this was another disappointment for us. Optional combination fare scored very high, as you can see. When we started short transit, there were some, I hate to say this, but it is the truth, there were some personality issues that were involved in preventing short transit from interacting with Ocean City as well as it could have at the time. I don't know if that's still the case, but definitely when you look at the issue of transit on the 3 counties, it is hard to imagine it being at its optimal best without Ocean City being a strong partner. The route system is a catch-22. Obviously, everybody wants better route system, but with low ridership numbers and funding issues, what comes first? You need to be able to provide the funding if you can show the demand, but you can't show the demand if you don't have people currently using it. But the survey response says that it's an important combination, important item. Event service, this did not surprise us. We expected this to be very popular, and it definitely was. Targeted advertising campaigns, I don't think this scored very high because people didn't really understand what this was. In fact, there were some comments that were put in the comment box about this question. So these 2 questions, actually targeted advertising. What we know is that these things are used in peer and aspirational peer transit providers, and they seem to be happy with these. Targeted advertising is more e-commerce, if you will. It is more customized than simply putting a billboard somewhere or an ad somewhere. So many of the successful transit systems are using these successfully. I mentioned the importance of coordination with Ocean City, and that shows again in this particular question as 4.0. Now, don't worry about what you're seeing on screen. This is just to tell you that we created a simulation model with these different interventions and the data we received both from our literature review as well as our survey results. We created this simulation model and we simulated the future with and without each and every one of these interventions, 250,000. When I say we, the computer did it. And it then gave us an idea as to how much of an impact each one was going to have and whether that impact was significant or not. A lot of these interventions do have an impact. Unfortunately, they are really not a significant impact. I'm going to explain why I think that is the case, but we are still recommending, in spite of the fact that the simulation results did not show a significant impact. In other words, it didn't increase the choice ridership significantly. And when we say significantly, we're looking for any kind of increase more than 2.5% increase. And we didn't really see that in any one of these, especially given the plus or minus sensitivity of the model results. But we still recommend these changes. The technological upgrades, some of them, as I said, are already in place or in progress, the bus attributes, and then, of course, targeted marketing and advertising. Let me get back to why I think, why we as a team think the interventions did not show more than 2.5%. Most important thing is we are not in a city environment where traffic is an issue. Many of the users, choice riders in other parts of the country are doing that to avoid traffic. And also parking is a big thing in especially urban environments. They use transit so that they don't have to hunt for a parking spot. That is not an issue. Most everybody has a vehicle or access to a vehicle. Roads are not currently congested the way they would be in an urban environment. And there's plenty of parking available at destinations. These are very significant factors in determining whether a choice rider is going to jump onto their vehicle and go at the time of their convenience to the destination of their convenience to the very last few yards to their destination or not. So for those reasons, we think that while these recommendations are still valuable, we do not think they are going to increase future choice ridership by more than 2.5%. Come back to my choice in when I was in Europe of using public transportation both in France and in England. Well, especially in England where I already had a car, yes, parking was a little bit of a determinant. There was difficult parking on campus. Traffic was okay, but the biggest determinant was the cost of gasoline. Using today's dollars, cost of gasoline was over 2.5 times what it was at the time in the United States. And in other parts of Europe, such as Italy, France, the Netherlands, it's almost 3 times the cost per gallon. So there's a built-in incentive to not use your vehicle given those gas prices. Why are those gas prices so high? Because the difference between the cost of the gas and the price of the gas is substantially the tax they collect to fund public transportation. That's a policy decision they made. We don't have that here, at least not at that level. So it becomes an issue. And as you know, throughout the United States, very few transit systems can actually recover a significant percent of their cost through fare box recovery. It's mostly a subsidized utility. And combination of those things tell me that in this environment currently, there's no easy intervention you can do, easy improvement you can do to increase significantly choice ridership. Nevertheless, we continue to make these recommendations you see on the screen for obvious reasons. It's not just these improvements do not just increase choice ridership, but improve existing riders' quality of life in using the system and retaining them and slowly growing them. At this point, I would like to put up the question. I have some ideas as to what the future holds, and what the possible next steps would be, but I'd love to hear if you have any questions.
Are there any questions for Dr. Derricker?
Memo, I do have just a comment or see if there's an observation made. This is Andy. Knowing that we've been debating this and knowing the rise of rideshare platforms, your Ubers and Lyfts of sorts, and then the overhead costs of running a transportation system, has there been much consideration given to a benefit of more smaller vehicles rather than larger bus or oversized fleets? There's opportunity costs in both of those scenarios, but more of like a passenger van or smaller vehicle rather than large 30-passenger buses, and then increasing frequency.
Absolutely. Yes, Andy. In fact, that was also a part of our initial feasibility study when we were creating shore transit. And what we have found, and this still holds to this day, is that the most successful systems approach transportation using a portfolio approach. They match the size of the vehicle, the frequency of the service, and the type of the service to the users. For example, there was one particular case we studied when we were doing the original study. These were two neighbors on the west side of Salisbury. They were 3 or 4 doors from each other. Every morning, 2 12-passenger vans would come in to pick them up, funded by different nonprofit organizations because they were eligible through different requirements. And these two individuals riding 2 12-passenger vans on their own with 2 drivers would be taken to their workplace in Hebron. In the afternoon, the same 2 vans would come to pick them up, but because of regulations, now with 2 different drivers to take them back home 4 doors from each other. So the feasibility study suggested, and this was actually implemented, don't send them the vans, give them vouchers to ride a taxi and share a taxi. The cost reduction was phenomenal. Now, multiply this across the whole 3-county system, you see that using a flexible, dynamic system of matching the rider to the ride is beneficial. In fact, when we suggested this, one of the biggest opponents to the creation of shore transit was the taxi cab owners. They actually came on board. And we failed, unfortunately, at that time and to this day, to convince some of our nonprofit organizations who get significant subsidies for their vehicles and their drivers to share their assets with the regional transportation system. But if they could do that, there are the 8-passenger vans, there are the smaller cars, there are the 24-passenger vans. So you can increase and reduce the fleet, if you will, or the service depending on demand, which reduces or shares the overhead costs. So that is definitely something actually easier to do today with the technology and artificial intelligence platforms available to us than it was even back then. But yes, Andy, that is definitely a very important consideration.
Thanks.
Thank you, Andy. Any other questions? Memo, I didn't see it, or if I did see it, I missed it, and I didn't hear you say it. Is ridership increasing or static or decreasing?
Well, COVID threw a monkey wrench into all of that.
Storehouse again, and I'm on a Zoom call right now. Yeah, sorry.
So, COVID threw a monkey wrench into all of these. Prior to COVID, the service was fluctuating because the availability of routes or services was not stable. So you couldn't say it was increasing or decreasing, but it was being responded to by shore transit based on changes in service patterns and utilization patterns. So given where we were and what our peers were doing, we were okay-ish. And I say that ish because fare box recovery, which is a requirement, was never being really met sufficiently, which has all kinds of other implications. COVID, of course, reduced the demand. Especially since you look at the demand, there's a very substantial portion of that going from Pocomo, Princess Anne, and Salisbury to Ocean City for the workers, and some cases, elderly coming to medical appointments from Worcester County to Peninsula Regional. That demand actually went down a bit during COVID. Now, what's going to happen in the future? It's hard to guess at that one, but logic dictates that it will come back to some significant percentage of where it was, at least in the medium term. With these improvements we are suggesting, maybe it will help the system maintain where it was prior to COVID and maybe increase a couple percentage points here and there. But until something substantially different happens, for example, more frequent service, which currently financially is not possible, I don't see the utilization increasing.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Hearing none, thank you again, Memo. It's always a pleasure to see you.
Thank you. And with your permission, I'm going to jump off at this time. Bye, everybody. Have a wonderful afternoon.
I don't know.
Moving on, then, it's time for some public hearings, isn't it? First public hearing is on Resolution 08-2021, draft amendments to the 2019 Long Range Transportation Plan, Connect 2050, and that's Appendix F in our book. Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Chairman Kramer. If you can give me one moment. We're having technical difficulties as a result of my pudgy fingers.
My fat fingers on a cell phone is a constant.
Okay.
Is a constant dilemma.
There we go.
Are we good?
All right. Sarah and Tyson, can you hear me?
Did you close the window by accident?
What's that?
Did you close the Zoom meeting by accident, or is it still open?
So the meeting, I accidentally or inadvertently closed the meeting, and then I opened it back up.
So then they have to get let back in.
Okay.
I don't know if
Tyson, were you able to log back in?
they may be back in. We may not. Are you in on your computer? I just don't remember. Maybe he's not in, but you're in.
Yeah.
Rookies.
That's better than me calling other things.
True.
Yeah, so we're here. They were there.
Oh, there's Sarah.
Okay. Sarah, can you hear me?
I can.
Tyson, can you hear me?
Yes.
I apologize. it got to be 2:32. I got a little excited and shut the meeting down. If we could just wait another moment or two to see if we can get both John as well as Sharon Jones. It should only take a minute. I'm going to send them both an email right now. Did I mention how much I miss in-person meetings?
What's been difficult is just navigating between all the different platforms. Like we became Zoom masters, but when people went to WebEx or Google Meets or stuff like that, everybody has a little bit slightly different way of hosting the meeting.
Well, I, for one, my thinking on these kinds of meetings it sounds like 8, but it begins with an H.
I'll second that.
Well,
Yes, if we can just give them a few minutes. We're waiting for, at this moment, we're waiting for John Riley and Sharon Jones. Worst case scenario, we would not have a quorum. If that were the case, I'm going to recommend that we go ahead and conclude the meeting, or at least the public hearing. I can reschedule a vote consistent with the public participation plan, in which we could do it via phone and have that number open to the public. So right now, why these things are important that we kind of do it in a expeditious manner, it's not absolutely necessary. I do see that Sharon has joined us again. So it's just down to John Riley. If you don't mind just entertaining me for a few more minutes.
Go right ahead.
And see if John has received the email. And if not, then I'm going to go ahead and move forward with that recommendation that we do this in another venue and platform.
I think that's the most appropriate thing we can do.
Especially given the light of time that we're already over. Typically, we try to run these meetings like a business meeting of 1 hour and no more. However, these were really good, informative presentations.
We had 2 very important.
And I want to thank everybody on both the Technical Advisory Committee and the Council. I know over the past few years, a lot of our work program has really been limited to meeting the federal requirements. The updates of the Long-Range Transportation Plan, the Transportation Improvement Program, and the Unified Planning Work Program. We had contracts out on the street beginning as early as fiscal year 20, so that would have been July 2019. However, as February 2020 hit, we know what the impact of COVID has been. And because of that, some of these studies, like what Mr. Derricker presented, or Dr. Derricker, really were sensitive to the movements of people, and that you really need to see it in its natural environment of the transit system. We've also got some studies that are going to be presented before the end of this calendar year that relied on traffic counts for making recommendations. Well, when people weren't traveling, if you're going out and doing traffic counts, or if schools aren't in, that's going to give a significantly different picture than when everything is back up and running. At this point, I can stall for a few more minutes, but it is 2:37. I have no problem at making the recommendation that we move forward. The only person I see on here whose number I'm not certain about is someone with the number of 443-235-2279. And it appears
It's
John.
Sharon. It's Sharon.
Okay, I'm sorry, Sharon. You told me that once. I get confused because you got 2 boxes. This is like the Brady Bunch screen. And Mr. Riley has reconnected, or is in the process of reconnecting. And once he gets back on and lets us know, then we'll move forward with this.
I'm here.
Okay, everybody, I apologize about that. Some of you may have caught this. It got to be about 2:30. I got so excited that I went ahead and shut the Zoom meeting down. I've been told it was a rookie move. However, it was not intentional. And if it should happen again, I'll say I'm sorry in advance. So where we had left off is Chairman Kramer was turning it over to me. And at this point, we've got 3 public hearings ahead of us. In light of time, I'm going to be expeditious with the presentations. However, I am going to go ahead and read the public meeting and hearing notice into the record. Public meeting and hearing notice, Salisbury, Wicomico Metropolitan Planning Organization. The Salisbury Wicomico MPO Council will hold a hybrid, in-person and virtual meeting and public hearing on Wednesday, October 13th, 2021 at 1:30 p.m. The in-person meeting location is Council Chambers, room 301 of the Government Office Building, located at 125 North Division Street, Salisbury, Maryland, 21803. Zoom information for the public to participate via phone, dial in 301-715-8592, meeting ID 903-814, 0422 and passcode 13579. As part of the meeting, public hearings will occur on amendments to the adopted FY22 Unified Planning Work Program and the Long Range Transportation Plan Connect 2050, as well as adoption of the FY22, FY25 Transportation Improvement Program. Prior to enaction of the Salisbury Wicomico MPO Council, the documents are available for public review and comments. The documents can be viewed online at www.swmpo.org. All interested persons are invited to attend this public meeting. For further information, obtain an agenda for the meeting, or submit comments, contact Keith D. Hall, SWMPO Executive Director at 410-548-4860, fax 410-548-4955, or via email at khall@wicomicocounty.org. This public hearing notice was ran both in the Daily Times as well as the Delaware State News.
Mr. Hall, while you're getting your papers together, may I suggest that, so that you don't have to read that into the minutes for each of these resolutions, that you just add them and say it just one time?
That's where I was going with this. In addition,
Very good.
I'd like to do some upfront housekeeping right up front. First of all, good afternoon to everybody. It's good to see those in person as well as here and see those on screen. These next three agenda items for review and action of the council have been available for a public review and comment period prior to this meeting, which no comments have been received. This public hearing was advertised in accordance with the organization's public participation plan, which requires the notice advertised in a paper of general circulation at least 14 days prior to the meeting, posted on PAC 14 community calendar, and advertised on the MPO's website. Also on September 28th of this year, the MPO's Technical Advisory Committee reviewed each of the three items before the council this afternoon, at which time the TAC voted unanimously on each of the three items to forward a favorable recommendation to the council. So first item up for business is draft amendments to the SWMPO's adopted 2019 Long Range Transportation Plan, Connect 2050, Appendix F, the fiscally constrained and unconstrained project listing. The proposed amendments are necessary to ensure consistency between the LRTP and the Transportation Improvement Program. Prior to including a project into a Transportation Improvement Program, federal regulations require the items to be incorporated into the Long Range Transportation Plan. The source data for the proposed amendments are provided to the MPO by DelDOT and MDOT as part of their capital programming considerations. If everybody would turn to appendix number 5, you'll see Appendix F, which is the fiscally constrained project listing. I won't go through every project, but I am available to answer questions. The proposed amendments are captured as strike-throughs on the existing items and revisions, and new items are underlined. Again, I'm just going to give you a broad overview. Page F2, City of Salisbury and Wicomico County. The projects have been removed since the funding did not extend past FY21. For page F3, DelDOT, also system preservation. We removed projects in which funding also did not extend past last fiscal year. Under system preservation for the transit section, which is page F5, last page, revised costs and available project funds, and we added 3 new line items related to replacement of transit buses. Staff's reviewed the projects, which are consistent with the Long Range Transportation Plan, and recommends approval. I'm available to answer any questions regarding this request.
Are there any questions? Will you proceed? Hearing none?
Sir.
Will you proceed?
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, I apologize. I did not understand the question. No, this is an individual resolution.
Correct.
So we take a vote on the resolution.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yep, my apologies.
I think we were both a little befuddled. All right. The chair will entertain a motion to approve this as noted. Is there a motion, please?
Andy Kitzer, I'll make a motion.
Thank you.
Second, Tyson Byrne, MDOT.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Chair votes aye. The motion is carried.
Okay.
Next, Mr. Hall.
Moving on for Resolution 09-2021. This is the draft FY 2022 to FY 2025 Transportation Improvement Program, which represents a planning level spend plan for the Departments of Transportation's any roads, bridges, dams, bike and pedestrian infrastructure, and transit projects using federal highway or transit administration's funds and located within the urbanized area must be included in a transportation improvement program. The information contained in this core planning document is consistent with DelDOT and MDOT state transportation improvement programs and consistent with the adopted 2019 Long-Range Transportation Plan, which was just amended by this council. As proposed, the total estimated spend over the next four years is approximately $127 million, of which the Maryland portion accounts for $88 million or 70% of that total amount, and the remaining funds for the Delaware portion account for $38.5 million or 30% of the total proposed TIP spend plan. Overall funding in support of road projects accounts for, well, not even just the road projects, the major three categories. Combined roads, $73 million or 58% of the total, $127 million. Bridges and dams, approximately $5 million or 4%. Transits, approximately $49 million or 38%. Staff's reviewed the projects and recommends approval, and I'm available to answer any questions.
Are there any questions for Mr. Hall? Hearing none.
I have a comment, actually, not a question.
Yes, sir. Go
Yes.
ahead, please.
I just looking at the resolution, it's got, or not the resolution, looking at the document, it has like dates in there that are highlighted yellow, the no dates, question marks instead. Just make sure that the final version has the actual dates and the resolution number.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Byrne. That is done intentionally, so it does not have the appearance that this is already done before a meeting has ever occurred. But we will definitely address that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? They don't necessarily have to be questions. Hearing none, Mr. Hall, are you ready for a request for a motion?
Yes, I am.
All right. Chair will entertain a motion for approval of Resolution 09-2021 as described.
Charles Anderson will make that motion.
There's a motion. Is there a second, please?
Second, Sarah Bynum King.
Thank you. There's a motion and a second. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Are there any opposed? Hearing none, chair votes aye. The motion's approved. Mr. Hall, thank you. Would you go on now with resolution number 10, 2021?
Thank you, Chairman Kramer. Moving forward, if everybody will go to tab 7, turn to the second page, which should have a page number at the bottom of 21. What we're looking at is proposed amendments to the FY 2022 Unified Planning Work Program at the end of the preceding fiscal year. All unencumbered and unspent funds from the previous budget are advanced into the current budget. This action requires the review and recommendation of the TAC as well as council review and action. On page 21, it illustrates the proposed changes to the budget by major 4 funding sources, whereas the page behind that, the 11/17, Appendix A, has additional detail of the changes by funding source for each state. The total amount of unallocated funding being incorporated into the FY 2022 budget is $587,396.79, which, if approved, will bring the total FY 2022 budget to $801,857.07. As proposed, the increases include the core planning, an increase of $194,000 for a total of $217,000, $600. MPO administration, an increase of $87,000 for a total of $140,000. Public participation, there are no proposed changes. And special studies, an increase of $306,396.79 for a total of $438,257.07. Staff has reviewed the proposed amendments and recommends approval. I'm available to answer any questions related to this matter.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Are there any questions or comments before I call for the motion? Hearing none, the chair will entertain a motion to approve Resolution 10-2021. Is there a motion, please?
Andy Kitzrow, I make a motion to approve Resolution 10-2021.
Thank you, Mr. Kittredge. Is there a second?
Tyson Byrne from MDOT seconds.
Thank you for the second. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Are there any opposed? Chair votes aye. Motion's carried. That concludes our public hearings. Mr. Hall?
Yes, sir.
Before we adjourn, I'll take a minute, if I may, to ask if there are any updates from MPO members. Hearing none. I don't see any more work on the agenda, so the chair will entertain a motion that the meeting be adjourned. Come on, don't be bashful, people. We're almost finished.
Sarah Bynum King, motion.
Thank you so much.
I'll second it.
Motion moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion's carried. The meeting's adjourned, but before we depart, I want to thank everyone for your involvement and your patience while we had some technical difficulties. But the two reports that we had today, I think, are certainly as important, if not more so, than many of the things that we've had to address in the past. Not to say that they were not important too, because they were. But these are both things that are looking forward and are very important to the region that this body represents. Mr. Hall, thank you very much. We're adjourned. I hate these meetings.
Stay well, everybody.